Welcome back, human. It's going to be a long one. Get comfy. Go get some coffee. Go get some tea. I don't care. Just chill out. If you saw the Mad Gas video I did, you know exactly what you're getting into. If you didn't, this is going to be me trying to go over the historical origins and any factual information I can on the history of whatever topic I'm doing. For this one, it's going to be the history of the Doppelganger Phenomenon. So, it's going to be, I did a bunch of research, I have a bunch of notes, and now it's not an exact script. It's, what it is I have my notes, and then I'm just going to talk about what the note pertains to just with my own words, just off the top of my head. So this isn't going to be like a strict script, this is more free form, more of me just talking about everything and trying to get information out there, because I'm super interested in these types of topics and like the occult and mythology stuff. I'm really interested in that. Some of these topics don't seem to have that much coverage, so I want to try to get as much practical information all in one video. It's going to be audio only, nothing you need to watch like physically, because a lot of what I like is videos I can just like listen to while I'm doing something else, especially like long form content. So that's exactly what this is going to be. It's not going to be a strict script. It's not going to be something with a bunch of images and stuff. You're just going to relax and just listen to what I have to say about it, and you can feel free to say whatever you want about it. After the video is done, you can write a comment, tell me what you think about everything. If there's any notable cases of sightings that I missed or don't know about, or just interesting ones, because this one, okay, I'm gonna start talking about it now. So this one was really hard information wise, because it was nowhere near as factual events as the Mad Gasser incidents, and even that's up in the air and stuff. But it's not like this was crimes that were committed that have a start and end date and times for certain things. I really badly just wanted to find the origin of the doppelganger stories and phenomenon itself, but I don't think I did. I got a couple origins, multiple, but I don't think I could find one concrete origin, and I'm scouring the internet for this stuff, and surprisingly, this is really hard to just find info about. I feel like this is the kind of thing I need, actual books that I could read to figure things out, because the online information is not really getting me to where I want to be. So I'm also going to preface this. Everything I say has different sources attached to it and stuff, and I'm never gonna confidently say something if I don't believe it has some sort of source behind it. I'm not gonna pretend either that I know for sure about anything, because everything is just speculations and different accounts and stuff. I don't want to lead anybody into thinking something is absolutely true when it's not. I'm not trying to pretend to have all the answers here, and just going over different accounts from different people. A lot of them are second-hand accounts of other people seeing things and other people saying things about other people. So just keep that all in mind. A lot of the information I was getting was just repeating the same info over and over and over and over again, and just kind of, which if you're just trying to get a very generalized point across, it's probably for the best to repeat the most notable examples, the most notable folklore and stuff. But if you want a really in-depth, not guide, but a really in-depth video or something on this, it's not gonna cut it for me to tell you the 3 most prominent incidents and just leave it at that without going into anything extra. So, alright, that's enough rambling. Expect some rambling, obviously, because it's more freeform. But, okay, so the origins, I got multiple different points. Origins not going to cover everything in here. It's going to be multiple different points of either the word itself or the mythology surrounding it. But the word itself is German, and it can, from what I understand, it means multiple things when you try to translate it. I don't know if there's one correct direct translation of it, but the couple that I'm seeing is double walker or double goer. So I'm probably double. I don't know any German or anything, and Google Translate certainly isn't any help, because even when I put in doppelganger into Google Translate under the German to English category, all I get back is doppelganger, so that is not helpful. So we're going to go with a double walker or double goer. If anybody happens to speak German, please let me know what, your closest translation as a German speaker, if you know some German, what it would be, because I would like to have a more accurate description of it, but this is probably just people speaking English trying to translate what it means and stuff. I could be wrong, though. So, double walker, double goer, and I'm sure some of this information you probably heard before. Obviously, it's like supposed to be an omen of bad luck. A lot of people reported that if you see your doppelganger, that means you're going to die soon. Can I say that word? I don't know if I can say that word. You're going to meet with a terrible fate soon. So, yeah, essentially, something bad is going to be very imminent if you see your own doppelganger. Something I didn't see or know about beforehand, before doing this research, is that I saw one account, I can't quite remember what site I saw this on, but it was saying that your doppelganger may give you a purposefully, malicious and incorrect advice to, screw with your life. And it wasn't like one of those sites where it was like, oh, your doppelganger, if you see them, they're going to do this and this. Not like some, site just talking about, paranormal spooky stuff. It was it was reading of some account from someone, and they said, they got, bad advice on their doppelganger. And we're not going to get into my opinion yet. It's something else I've been trying to do with these videos, like my Mad Gasser video. Because I don't see a lot of people doing this, but I'm going to give my personal opinion about everything that I read at the end. But at the very end, I want to talk about everything first, from its origins, to sightings, to depictions in media, to possible explanations. And then after all that, I'm going to give my opinion on everything, and you could totally give yours too if you want. That's fine by me. Anyways, so maybe it would give you some bad advice. I saw from another source that apparently and now this source, I remember this was just some spiritual nonsense kind of source, and I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes if you're into that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to offend anybody or call anybody dumb or anything. It's just I want you to understand the type of source I'm looking at. It was because with stuff like this, you have to understand that the source is more susceptible in believing paranormal activities as opposed to a more scientific approach to things, because that could wildly vary what type of information you're going to get when someone has a bias or something, which is, it's human nature. That's totally understandable. We all have our biases, whether or not we think we do. I have my own biases. I won't spoil it, because then I might spoil what I think of all this, but you'll find out through me talking the video, kind of my viewpoint on things. But, that's the fun thing with this kind of things, is we all have separate viewpoints from different backgrounds and what may make sense to us. And when it comes down to it all, how I feel a lot of these types of phenomena is it all comes back down to something. Something actually caused this kind of stuff to happen. This stuff just doesn't come out of nowhere. However, so this one source was, more spiritual, and they were talking about how doppelgangers have no reflection or shadow, which is going to be an interesting point when I bring up the media discussion, as long as I remember to bring that up again. I also have that it could tie into the changelings phenomenon, which also has some German origin. So a lot of what I'm getting is that a lot of these origin stuff for either the word or the sightings or the mythos has a lot to do with coming from Germany itself, which is kind of what I thought going into it. But there is some other stuff that I'll get into a bit. But it could tie into the changelings. Wow. Changelings phenomena. I've been trying to say that word over and over again. I'm leaving that taken. I'm human. We're all human. It's hard to say some of these words. And I'm a native English speaker. This is embarrassing. However, changelings. There's a really good video by the YouTuber Shrouded Hand that went into this phenomena. Super good video if you want more in-depth information about this. And, honestly, just definitely watch his content. If you're watching this somehow and you stumble across this and you don't know Shrouded Hand, very good videos about this kind of spooky subjects and stuff. But the general gist of changelings are that they were, entities that would replace, a newer born baby. And So obviously that can tie into Doppelganger Phenomenon in a different way, with it being like babies. And this, as I said, is has ties to German folklore. Now, it's not only German. However, something I wanted to bring up and I had to bring up is, in the German folklore version of this, is how you identify a changeling if your baby has been swapped with one. So some of it's not bad. Cooking eggshells to confuse it, because it would talk and reveal its intelligence. I guess that would just be way too much for the changeling. This next one, I cannot say this in the words I would like to use, but you would put said changeling and you would make it very warm. Very, 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 very uncomfortably warm, like you were baking cookies. You get what I'm trying to say. I'm not going to get more in depth than that. And or inflicting physical violence upon it. Now, this is both hilarious and really bad. It kind of goes both ways. If this was somehow still happening nowadays, I would not be laughing about it. However, and I'm not calling people, from like the 1800s dumb or whatever. We just, your world understanding is only what you can make of it with common intelligence at the time. If this makes sense in the 1800s, this makes sense. They weren't stupid for believing in certain stuff when that's all they knew, and were just trying to make sense of what they had. We wouldn't be as smart of a species as we are now if all we did was not try to make sense of things. Because we're constantly trying to explain things and make sense of things, I think that's how we grow as an intelligent species. So I don't think these people are stupid. However, this is incredibly violent. It is incredibly messed up when you think about the fact that, if this is your baby, let's hope this did not happen often, because that is bad. I had to get into that. That was so interesting. It was very messed up. But obviously that could have some ties to the Doppelganger Phenomenon. But most of the time, it's more so talking about, like, adults or normal-sized humans, not like babies. Because it kind of doesn't tie too much into the folklore itself. But, I thought it was worth bringing up because this is a way less factual video than the Madagascar video. So, to me, it's more interesting to bring up different stories and folklore surrounding this, because that's kind of all you can parse out of it. So, changelings, maybe. The word itself was coined in a 1796 German novel, which the story was about a man who was, like, swapping identities with his friend, and they were, like, assuming each other's lives. So it's super interesting that it came from there. And that book itself had two different, I don't know if it's two different spellings or two different words itself, because, like I said, I'm not a German speaker, so I don't know if it's just the way their writing works, but there's two different versions of it. One of them actually just being Doppelganger. I think the other one had like a T in it. But it is interesting considering that story itself is about, swapping identities. The other thing I want to bring up, going back way farther than the German origins, is that I was seeing a couple accounts of a, like, ancient Egyptian origin to this phenomena. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that word. It's probably going to be a lot. I really hope you don't get annoyed with it, because I can't call it a case. It's not like a true crime case where I can be like, oh, the case of the Madagascar, the case of the Zodiac Killer, or whatever. It's a phenomenon. It's a more spiritual, paranormal thing. But yeah, ancient Egyptians had these spirits known as Ka, and now I excuse any pronunciations that you may not even pronounce the K in it like that, but it's K-A, and that's all it is. And it wasn't written as like a plural, so I don't know if it would be like Kaz with an S, or just like Ka as in like in general without any plurals, but it was known as like a spirit double of you that had the same memories and feelings of you in like ancient Egyptian lore, I guess. I know it's not I know they weren't fictitious people, but we'll go with the lore. So that was interesting. I didn't know about that whatsoever before starting this video. So there are some even farther back reportings of doppelgangers, but surprisingly, it is super hard to find information other than like German and then some ancient Egyptians. There's little crumbs here and there from different cultures talking about, but like nothing that is substantial enough where I can even like write like a paragraph about it. There's so little of a like starting point to all this, which to me that's how I look up things. Like I start from the beginning, chronologically speaking. That way, and I think it's just the way my brain works, is I want the context to everything. I want to know why something is, starting from the very beginning origin of it, which I think helps paint the best, most clear picture of whatever topic you're trying to understand more of. I don't want to just start in the middle of something and be like, okay, we're going to go from here, but ignore the origins. I tried super hard to figure out where this came from, and I don't have an answer for you. I don't know. I really don't know. And I looked all over the internet, a bunch of different pages, more paranormal stuff, more just actual factual stuff. See, like I said, this is something where I feel like I need to go to like the library and check out books and start figuring something out. But then even then, I need to like cross-check things, so I don't even know how, not factual, but I don't know how all-encompassing that information would be. So for now, we're going to go with mostly German origins for most of the folklore, but that is not the end-all be-all, and that is not the origin. If we had to go chronological from what I'm seeing, we're probably going to tie that back to ancient Egyptians. But most of the modern folklore surrounding it is not from the ancient Egyptian mythology surrounding the Ka. It is just something similar enough to bring up as maybe a point of origin. Because like I said, every idea like this has to come from somewhere, whether it's completely fictitious or not. It comes from somewhere, you know? Someone's talking about, someone's making it up, whatever. Everything comes from somewhere. So we can point to ancient Egyptians, but I don't think that's like the true origin of it. Again, it's very hard to pinpoint that because it doesn't have too much in common with our modern understanding of the Doppelganger Phenomenon. Oh, and one more thing I saw a couple people talking about was that it's like your Doppelganger would be a reflection of your negative qualities, almost getting into like Jungian psychology of like the shadow self, which is a whole nother topic. Maybe I'll even do that, because I do love that kind of stuff. But yeah, it kind of ties along to that too, where it's like some people are describing the Doppelgangers as not like an evil version of themselves, but as in it's going to reflect the qualities of yourself that you don't like and that you don't want at the surface. And it's like that up front, like a reversal of how you may present your social self, your social qualities and stuff, and more of your selfish interpersonal ideas and feelings, which everybody has, you know, and maybe it's just a way of processing certain things. So I think that's going to wrap it up for the origin section of it. This is way messier than I wanted it to be, but like, look into it yourself, and you'll kind of start to see what I mean, where you're like, if you're trying to put like a concrete origin on this, it is hard. It is very hard, and like, maybe I could have done like another hour of research or something, but to me that was kind of like a sunken cost fallacy, where I'm like, I don't think me putting any more time in this is going to get me any more of a clear answer. If anything, it's only going to dilute what I have already written down. So now we're going to get into possibly the more exciting stuff, is like the sightings of doppelgangers. And this is not anything that's like fictional, except for like maybe one painting. This is going to be like actual accounts from people. Whether or not you believe it, that's not what I'm saying. More so what real people have actually said about doppelgangers. So I try to lay this out in as chronological of an order as I could find, because like I said, I kind of want things to be in a certain order from start to end. So now this isn't going to be every sighting that has ever happened, because that would start to get boring and wear down on your interest in this. And some of the cases are so far removed from the case itself, like multiple people parroting something that somebody else saw but far removed from them to the point where I'm like, I'm not even going to bring this up. Some of the sightings I was reading, they don't even have names attached to them. Some of them didn't even have a time period attached to them. Like, I'm not gonna read it. That's not gonna help your understanding whatsoever. So we're gonna start with one of the earlier accounts I found being in 1612 in Paris. Now, this is something I kind of started to notice where a lot of these sightings aren't like, hey, I saw this. It's more like, hey, my friend saw his wife, or so on and so forth, or they're super distant from the account itself. So make of that what you will. I thought that was kind of surprising when I started looking into it. So there's an account from an Isaac Walton who claimed that this poet, John Donne, pronunciation could be bad, that John saw his wife's doppelganger. Now this is going to get a little graphic. I'm going to try to use as clean of language as I can for this. I don't mean I'm going to cuss or anything. I'm just trying to not make this rough to listen to. So, the same night that John's wife had a unfortunate stillbirth of their daughter, he saw his wife pass through his room with the deceased child, and it vanished after looking at him. And this is what is... it feels wrong to use the word interesting here, but what's interesting about this is that he saw his wife and not himself, but he saw a doppelganger of his wife. But this is also coming not from him, but from another person on his behalf. So that was 1612 Paris, and that was seeing his wife after something bad happened, but she wasn't actually around. And this is something else that you're going to start noticing a trend of, that it is like the mythology of it, a bad omen of something, and usually like dead on, like something bad happened that day and then they saw something, which I'm going to get more into that later, but obviously kind of keep that in the back of your head from a psychology standpoint and what that could mean. So we're going to move like way far into the future now, into 1796, where this I thought was interesting. So there was this Russian, I don't want to say king, it was a woman, but this Russian ruler, royalty, sure, we'll go with that, Catherine the Great. And supposedly one of her servants saw her sitting on her throne while she herself was sleeping. I mean, Catherine was sleeping, but the servant saw Catherine on the throne. And like later, she died of a stroke. And apparently, the servant, or no, not the servant, sorry, Catherine ordered the doppelganger to be shot or something along those lines, but she died of a stroke like soon after. I want to say soon. But the timeline of the doppelganger thing, I am unsure of, so I don't want to act like I know that it was like, oh, right after. But apparently, within enough of a correlation for the servant to say something about it. And again, make of that what you will. But in interesting cases somewhere else, again, not all the origin stuff is from Germany. A lot of the sightings are from other places in the world earlier. So this one, this next one, I really thought this was cool and interesting, and it's a little bit of a subversion of expectations in the doppelganger sighting. So it was sometime roughly between 1811 and 1833, which I know is a huge gap, but it's because it wasn't revolving around a death or something with a concrete date. It was from a autobiography, I believe. So a man was on his horse, and he was going to visit like his girlfriend at the time. I know that is not the terminology they'd be using in the 1800s, but you know what I mean. They weren't married, and he was like sneaking around to see this woman who wasn't like allowed to see him. And that, I don't think that's really important to the story, just context for what he was doing. So he was going on horseback, and then he said that not visually with his eyes, but kind of in his mind. So I don't know what he was talking about, but in his mind he saw himself coming on horseback on the same road as him, but he was wearing something different, interestingly enough. So he said that 8 years later, he was going down the same road to do the same thing, and he realized, it kind of occurred to him that what he was wearing by complete accident was what his doppelganger was wearing in his like vision from 8 years ago, which is super interesting because that's like a subconscious thing making him dress up like that, or just a complete accident. And then he realized, oh, like that was me, I guess, is what he was getting at. The language was kind of flowery, and I couldn't quite understand what he was meaning by it. But from what it sounded like to him, he was talking about how it was like a calming experience, and it wasn't like scary. And also, this case was a German case, so this was like our first chronological German case that I'm throwing out here. I'm not saying it's the first one, but to him, it was something that wasn't scary, and it wasn't like a bad omen. It was just more of it was a calming thing to him, and more probably just an odd occurrence. I thought that was really interesting, though. So the next case is 1822 in England, and it was from this author Percy Shelley. Again, excuse any pronunciations. And his wife claimed that he met his doppelganger shortly before a drowning accident where he unfortunately passed away. And apparently, from what he told his wife, when he saw his doppelganger, it asked him how long he means to be content, which is really freaky. I don't like that at all. That seems like a bad omen. Probably has something to do with some of the mythology surrounding it going forth. And so later on, the wife saw him passing by the window, and apparently he was out there a lot doing whatever outside. And the thing is, though, at this point, when she saw him outside the window, he was already dead. Somebody let her know, because she asked about him, like, oh, where is Percy? And they were like, what do you mean? He's dead. And so that's, like, interesting how, again, wife saw doppelganger of husband, not, like, herself. And the one other interesting point of this case is that one of Percy's written works had, like, a doppelganger in it, where a character was meeting themselves. So I feel like that's fascinating, and then that can kind of go into the psychology of maybe that idea was already kind of planted in his head, but I don't want to get too far into that yet, but just like, again, kind of keep that in the back of your head while you're listening to this, and then we'll get to it later. Next case I find kind of hilarious, and I don't know if I should. So this was a case in 1850s, I don't have like an exact year, by a French writer, and I'd love to pronounce his name, and I'm going to try, but it is going to be incredibly incorrect, but I at least want you to know who I'm talking about. So it was by a Guy de Maupassant. I tried to make that sound French. I probably butchered that, but that way you at least know who I'm talking about. So there's not much to this case. I just wanted to share because this is a case of what in the world are you talking about, good sir? He claimed that his doppelganger... Well, no, he said double, not doppelganger. But he said that his double would walk into his room and tell him what to write. And he was a writer, so his double would tell him what he was going to write. Just a quick case there from the 1850s. I find that kind of funny. Like, in the end, I guess he's still getting the ideas from himself in a super roundabout way, at least in his own head. He thought it was a double, but you get the point I'm trying to make, is that he was being told to write something from his double. But let's assume this is a psychological phenomenon. He was in a roundabout way just telling himself what to write. I guess that's a good way to get over a creative hump. You just, like, disassociate and have your doppelganger tell you what to do. That would just be easy sailing for anybody who's remotely creative. Not trying to make too much fun of the guy, because, again, 1850s, the world was different, cultures are different. I'm just saying, like, if you boil it down to just the straight what happened, as far as my double walked in the room and told me what I'm going to do, it's funny, you know? So the next thing I want to talk about real quick is not an actual case, but, like, this famous painting from 1851, so, you know, around the same time period. It was a painting called How They Met Themselves, and it was a painting of, like, a couple meeting themselves in the woods, and I guess it was a famous painting from the time. Just think it's interesting that someone was painting that idea at the time. That was from England as well. And I'm sorry for some of the pauses. I just realized that in some of my notes, I didn't write where it was from, and I feel like that's super important. So that painting was from England. And again, I'm not saying that was a case or something. It was just that he painted a painting of him and his wife and meeting their doppelgangers. And I think the wife was kind of ill in the picture or hurt in some way after meeting the doppelganger or something. So again, kind of a negative connotation to the phenomena. And this is our next case. I feel like I might have heard this before, but I'm not entirely sure. And if you haven't, this one's kind of wild. So 1860s America, United States America. We got Abraham Lincoln, obviously one of our presidents. I'm American. I'm from the United States, so if you're on the outside, I'm sure you know who he is as well. I think that's something that's kind of interesting that I don't always think about, and I don't know how many people do, is there's certain stuff in my culture that I'm just this is a given as far as knowledge is concerned, but to somebody from an entirely different country, I don't know how common somebody like Abraham Lincoln is in other people's history and culture, or if that's just only important to us Americans. However, Abraham Lincoln was one of our earlier presidents, and apparently he saw in his reflection, he saw double. So he saw two of him, and the double apparently looked sickly and pale, and his wife thought it was a bad omen. And his wife, when Abraham Lincoln told her that what he saw, she was like, "You're not going to make it past your first term of presidency." And if you know anything about Abraham Lincoln, for anybody that's not from the U.S., and for all I know, this is super common knowledge, but obviously he was taken out, and he did not get to his second term of presidency, so his wife was absolutely correct in that. However, now I'm not saying this has anything to do with what happened to him because it was very deliberate. This might explain what he was seeing, though. So apparently he was in pretty poor health, and he had a couple diseases, and he was also taking pills to help him that contained mercury, and obviously at the medical science at the time they probably didn't realize how damaging that was, but he was taking pills that had mercury in them, so that probably was not helping his health whatsoever, which might explain what he saw, because I feel like the human mind can do some really crazy stuff to try to warn us about stuff that's happening. I'm not saying that it's paranormal, but I'm just saying where it's trying to rationalize or give you information that your subconscious might be picking up on, or your body itself, to process it in a way that you may be able to understand it easier. And I find it fascinating that Abraham Lincoln is one of the people that have the most famous cases of seeing his double. But it wasn't like seeing the doppelganger in real life, so to speak. It was just a reflection. But with what happened to Abraham Lincoln and with what he was talking about, it's a very fascinating case. And especially, again, it's another one to write into this is a bad omen kind of case. And I realized, too, just quick break before we get to the next case. Sorry if my audio is kind of dipping in and out in volume. I'm going to be normalizing in everything I usually do. But the way I have my second monitor to read all my notes, I kind of have to back away from the mic, and I kind of don't realize where I'm at sometimes when I'm reading it. So excuse any of the somewhat inconsistencies. I'm trying to stay in the same spot, but when you're just talking, you kind of stop thinking about exactly your position. My mic is just literally hanging on a stack of books right now, so it's not like I have a proper setup for that. So hopefully it still sounds okay and stuff. I just kind of tend to move around a bit when I'm talking, especially when I'm trying to read my notes, because some of them are longer than others and they're taking up more space on the document. Anyways, excuse that. We're going to go now to 1893. And this is going to be the last major case I'm talking about sightings-wise, and I'm not saying that these are all of them, obviously, but I'm also surprised of the lack of big cases of doppelganger sightings. I just, in my head, and it's so fascinating when I start researching this stuff, how much you assume a certain phenomenon is a big deal, and then you kind of see there's almost nothing surrounding it. And it's the same thing with the Mad Gasser cases that I covered in my previous big video, where it's like, I thought there's going to be so much information about this, and maybe not as much as other mythology and phenomena and stuff, but like these cases and stuff, there's not much to them. There's a couple big sightings, and then that's kind of it. It kind of just peters out after that. So the last major sighting I'm going to talk about today would be 1893, and this is not the end of the video. This is just sightings, so don't go anywhere. We are not done yet. This is still going to be a minute. I hope you're enjoying the ride. I hope you're enjoying all the information, and just because like the sighting sports are just kind of like scary stories, and everybody likes scary stories, you know. So in 1893, a wife was hosting a party while her husband was away. He was away at sea, and multiple people at the party, including his wife, from my understanding, saw him walk in the party, and he didn't say anything, and he was just kind of there, and then I'm assuming he was just like gone after that, and that same night, he happened to pass away on the ship he was on. And what's super weird about the ship accident is whoever was, I almost said piloting the ship. I don't think that's the word, but whoever was commanding the ship made a really like unexplainable weird maneuver that caused them to like intentionally, possibly, crash into another ship. And I guess now it's not like I know like boat routes from the 1890s. However, from the understanding at the time, it was a very odd maneuver that made no sense, and it caused their death. Maybe multiple people's deaths, probably, including the husband, and they saw him that same night at the party, which is super fascinating and absolutely terrifying. So that's the end of like the major sightings. But one thing I want to bring up, and I surprisingly I follow a lot of like spooky story stuff, more so like true stuff, or that's not quite the word I'm looking for, but like not like scary internet stories you're writing that are intentionally fictional, but more like internet mysteries or mythologies or urban legends or whatever. And I haven't heard of this one, but I guess there's something going around with some of the younger generation today called like twin strangers, and it's just people looking up pictures of themselves online with certain tools that are matching their face to people that look a lot like them. And I haven't heard of that before, and it's something that the younger generation is getting involved with, and it's kind of cool that like all this stuff wraps back around to some of the younger people. They're kind of repeating some of our mythology, even accidentally. So, because I doubt this has anything to do with the whole doppelganger phenomenon. At least, I don't know how much the younger generation is thinking about this kind of stuff, but it's just interesting that this type of thing, this type of case in just human existence is repeating itself with a new generation of people that might not be super familiar with all the folklore surrounding it. And humans just kind of have a way of latching on to certain ideas and repeating them even without previous information on the subjects. I find that really fascinating. I don't have too much to say about it because it's literally just like what it is, and I don't think it's super relevant, but it's adjacent enough where it's a fun point to bring up. And, you know, if you know anything about this stuff and you're younger and you're online more and you have like partaken in this twin strangers thing, you know, like let me know about it. So it's super fascinating stuff. However, I would say just be careful giving away pictures of yourself depending on how you know, honestly just be careful with that kind of stuff. You don't want any data or information of yours getting into the wrong hands. But I'm also not saying that, you know, like, don't do anything ever. You know, just be careful of where you're giving your data. But obviously, it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't think it has anything to do with it exactly, but it's interesting enough to bring up that this is going on nowadays in a different way. It's evolving into something for something else for a more modern understanding of it, which is cool. Before we get to doppelgangers in media, I want to talk about this one crime case that I read about while doing research on this that I thought was absolutely fascinating, because none of this is like paranormal or hearsay. This just actually happened in recent times. So there's this in Kansas. There's this dude, and he committed a crime, and he went to prison for 17 years before everyone found out that, oh my god, it was not him. It was somebody that looked exactly like him and had the same first name, so that whoever identified him was like, well, obviously that's the guy. And I saw a picture of this dude. Here, let me, I don't have the name on me, but just look up Kansas 17-year prison sentence, same name, same face, or something like that. And like, if you find the article I was looking at, if you want to know the article, just like I'll put it in like the description or something. These two people looked like identical, and especially if they had like the same name, I could see how that happened, and it sucks because the dude didn't do anything, and he spent nearly 20 years in prison for something he didn't do just because he looked like someone else and he had the same name. And I don't mean like that, oh, they look kind of similar. Like, no, straight up, if I didn't have any context in this, and I saw the two photos, I'd be like, okay, those are two photos of the same person. I can't describe, they literally look like the same person, and especially if they have the same name. So that's not like a sighting, that's just something that happened in recent times involving crime that was like, wow, I have not seen that before, but I totally understand how that happened, but it sucks. That absolutely sucks. So I had to go over that. That was super interesting to bring up. Now we're going to get into in media section. And I did this with my previous like spooky video. I like to go over what we have put into media involving certain mythology, because that kind of shows how different people are interpreting it. Now, there is a little more in media for doppelgangers than compared to, like, say, like the Mad Gasser. However, because there is so much, I don't necessarily want to go over media depictions of doppelgangers of stuff that I have not personally like experienced, because there is so much of it, and then I would just be literally telling you like the title of a book that I haven't read, and so I can't really give you any information on it. But you can literally just use a search engine and look up doppelgangers in media, and you'll find different articles. Wikipedia had a section on it with sources that you can look at the sources and read different things. And obviously, if there's a certain depiction in media of a doppelganger that you like, for sure, just tell me about it or whatever. It's interesting stuff, and I only want to talk about personal things that I have consumed media-wise with doppelgangers, just so I don't bog this down with just telling you, oh, book title from this thing had doppelgangers, and I don't know anything about it, because you're not going to really get any extra information about it. So we're going to start with a film, and if you've seen it, you probably already know what I'm going to talk about because it's a recent film, but it was Jordan Peele's Us. Obviously, that was huge into the doppelgangers thing, and I don't want to say too much without saying, spoiler warning. Please watch the movie if you haven't, and then come back to this video later or whatever. So that was going along with abandoned subway systems in America, and it was housing like literal doppelgangers of people that were existing in like the normal world, so to speak. Not that it was like a different universe or something. They were just literally like underground. And I believe, if I'm remembering the film correctly, is like one of the main characters was one of the doppelgangers that was living among normal society, and they got replaced with like the original person after they were like in this like place with like funhouse mirrors and stuff. So that's, to me, that's one of the most relevant current film adaptations of doppelganger mythology. Again, this stuff I want to bring up because this is how we're looking at it through a modern lens, which is really interesting. And so that's like the major film thing that I personally know. Now, there's other films that have doppelgangers as like a focus, but I haven't watched them from what I was reading. But this is something I think I'm interested in. I probably will watch a couple of them because obviously I'm very interested in the mythology of doppelgangers. I wouldn't be making like an hour-long video on it if I wasn't. There's 2 TV show examples of stuff I know. There's Twin Peaks that had a later episode about it, and then also there was a Twilight Zone episode about doppelgangers, and neither of which are fresh in my memory, so I can't go too in-depth with them. But both of those had doppelganger stuff, and that was way earlier than us. Twilight Zone, obviously, super, super early. Not like 1800s early, obviously, like some of the sightings I'm talking about, but earlier in filmed media. Twin Peaks being a little later. And then other things that I personally have experienced and know of is multiple video game adaptations of doppelgangers and their mythology. And one of the first ones I want to talk about is Devil May Cry 3, only because this goes back into the not having a shadow kind of thing, which is interesting. So if you played that game, I guess spoilers, if you haven't, go play Devil May Cry 3, you definitely should. Main character Dante, later on in the game, fights a doppelganger himself, and the thing doesn't cast a shadow, which is super interesting, because it kind of, is his shadow. Like, in the cutscene, when you fight the doppelganger, it is Dante's shadow, and it, becomes its own physical manifestation, and it fights like Dante, and you gotta, expose a light on it to be able to damage it, or else you won't be able to. But yeah, it doesn't cast a shadow of its own or anything, and when you beat the boss, you get an ability from it, literally called Doppelganger, and you activate it, and it just copies everything you do. So that's an interesting adaptation of it. There's obviously Castlevania Shift of the Night, where you literally fight Alucard's Doppelganger pretty early on in the game, and it kind of fights like you. It can do the same type of abilities and stuff. And then there's also RPG stuff that has doppelgangers. Me, I just know SMT stuff. It was in multiple SMT games, and they all have this cool common effect of usually repelling physical attacks or reflecting them, which is interesting when you kind of consider what a doppelganger is. I feel like that's a nice detail about them, that they reflect physical stuff. I just feel like that's a good way of putting doppelgangers into an RPG format. I really like their designs in these games too, especially with Strange Journey and Soul Hackers 2, which very recent example of it, where it's a doppelganger of the main character, but they're kind of shadowy, and they have kind of an unnatural smile on them, and they usually have even stats, and they reflect physicals, which is kind of abnormal. Well, not the physical part, but I at least remember with Strange Journey that doppelganger, at least in Strange Journey Redux, had completely even stats, which is super interesting. So there's some media examples of just stuff that I know. Obviously, there's a lot more, but like I said, I'm not going to get into them because I don't have personal experience with them, so I don't want to bog this down too much. So now for the part I think a lot of people probably are waiting for too, is the explanations portion of this. So we're going to start with some boring ones, and then we'll get into some more fun ones. But one of the most grounded reasonings would be that humans genetically aren't as diverse as you may think, and just statistically speaking, genetically speaking, especially with the amount of people that exist on Earth, the chances aren't as low as you might think to run into somebody that looks like you. We're not that diverse. We're not that different at the end of the day. I don't mean it that way, but genetically speaking, it's not too hard to find someone that's completely similar to you, which probably goes along with what some of the younger people are doing with that twin strangers phenomenon, is the fact that, yeah, especially nowadays, you probably could find somebody that looks like you, at least one person. It's probably possible, even if they're not an exact replica. They're probably close enough where if you change a couple things like haircut or something, that someone's going to look like you. So obviously that's grounded, boring. Maybe somebody saw someone look like themselves. However, that doesn't necessarily explain saying that someone saw themselves in close proximity, because just because there's somebody that looks like you, now that doesn't mean that they're going to live close to you and be close to you. That's starting to narrow down statistical likelihoods a lot. But that we just have to go with humans aren't that genetically diverse. We can worry about location later. I'm going to talk about what I think of that, but I'm just trying to give actual explanations of this without too much of my opinion yet. Some people, a little more paranormal, think parallel universes, that, their parallel universe self just kind of slipped in. Maybe if you're prone to believing in that kind of stuff, you can see this as a possible reason. Now, here's something super interesting that I didn't even know about before I started doing research on this. So I'm going to absolutely butcher this pronunciation. I am not a doctor. I apparently can't even speak English that well. Or my native language, I suppose. Helioscopy? I'm going to go with that. I'm so sorry. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about. But that's my best pronunciation. It can be a symptom from schizophrenia and epilepsy, and it can cause you to have an out-of-body experience where you may personally think that you're seeing yourself, which some medical people have attributed to explaining the Doppelganger Phenomenon as saying it's, and also, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I've been saying it so much that it's starting to not sound like a word anymore, and it's just noises I'm making with my mouth. But some more, I guess, practically minded people are using that as an explanation for seeing yourself. And I never even heard about that condition before until I was doing research. So that the only thing about that is, like, yeah, it can explain seeing yourself. I don't know if that can explain seeing yourself as yourself, but if you're disassociated mentally enough where you might think that is a double of yourself. So I'm not trying to call anybody, like, crazy or anything. I'm just saying from, like, a medical point of view, I could see how that could be, and I could also see how it could not be, but it's just something that I've never heard about before, and it could explain some, especially if we take in context of older civilization, like 1800s, where we might not have modern medical knowledge, and how somebody could have that happen to them with some sort of undiagnosed mental disorder, and obviously they don't know how to explain it, and that's a rational way of explaining it to them. It's like, oh, I saw my double. Obviously, hallucinations is my next explanation. Maybe not obviously, but that's such a broad term. Not a broad term, but there's so many things that could cause a hallucination. I'm just putting it down as a reason for it because that's what a couple people think. But there's so many different things that can cause a hallucination, and it's not always necessarily going to be you seeing yourself. You could just be sleep deprived and seeing something move in the corner of your eyes, and that's not to the same level as literally seeing yourself. And if anything, I kind of feel like this just wraps back into the medical problems as I was explaining, and it could just be a symptom of a unfortunate mental disorder. And the one last kind of reason I'm seeing is that obviously, if you're more prone to having supernatural beliefs, this may be your reasoning for certain events, and you may be more inclined to believe that you actually saw yourself if you're more susceptible to believing in paranormal activities or supernatural activities and anything along those lines. So that's kind of the couple explanations we can throw down for doppelgangers, and you can think any of these that you want. There's no wrong answers, there's no right answers. However, now we're going to get into the last segment of this video, which is going to be what do I personally think about it with everything that we've talked about today. So, last section. What do I personally think about this? I don't think it is real whatsoever. However, I think there are ways to explain people seeing it. So, I wouldn't say, let's go with, the Abraham Lincoln example. Someone seeing he saw a double of himself that looked sickly. No, I don't think he was lying. I don't think he was just making it up. However, I think that was his brain's way of coping and understanding maybe his underlying conditions that he didn't quite even know of himself, to explain to himself that he is not in good health. And I'm not trying to make that sound like it's something supernatural or paranormal. And if you believe that, that's your prerogative. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying what I think is that sometimes the brain does funny things that seem like they have no real explanation for, and it'll present information to you in a way that you'll understand it, even if it seems completely uncorrelated, like a coping mechanism, essentially. And even if you don't understand what your brain is trying to help you cope with. So I think for most of these cases, especially considering so many of them are from, like, 1800s and stuff, where it's gotta be either undiagnosed mental disorders or your brain trying to cope with a disease or something else that you don't understand, and it's trying to present this information to you in a way that maybe you can make sense of, or obviously we can go with people not understanding medical science enough, and maybe they do have some sort of episode where they had an out-of-body experience, but it's in the 1850s and we don't know how to explain that yet, so the person's like, hey, I saw myself, and then this person died, the next day or something, and then obviously, correlation and causation, 1850s medical science, you're like, whoa, this guy saw himself and then he died. So, that explanation would be, well, obviously this doppelganger thing could have some real weight to it, even though realistically all that's probably happening is they have some sort of undiagnosed disorder, along with health complications like physical ones on top of it, and obviously something horrible happened to them. And because I have a good feeling. I don't think I'm close to death, but maybe people that are will start to hallucinate something. And I feel like I've definitely heard people talk about that before. Or if you think about people with, like, near-death experiences, but say your body's very ill, and especially if you don't even realize it, your brain may be trying to cope with it in some sort of way, or produce certain chemicals that might cause hallucinations or something along those lines. And then you could obviously, if you're in bad health and you don't understand what's going on, you're probably going to pass away soon. And it's a very likely explanation for a lot of the older sightings, I would say. However, some of the stuff, if we go about, like, the case of the man on the horseback going to visit, like, his girlfriend, that I don't know. Obviously, there's some sort of other rational explanation for that, but it's interesting that one, it wasn't like he said that he saw it with his eyes, it was more like a mental image, and it wasn't a bad omen, which is super interesting. That's kind of an outlier to the rest of the cases. But, see, then, something that I can't necessarily explain, so let's say with the case of the woman who saw her husband at the party, however, he passed away that night and he wasn't anywhere close to that. That is super strange. It's almost like your brain has some sort of, like, sixth sense that something's wrong, but you just don't know what it is. And that, I couldn't explain what could be causing it. It's probably just like, you have a feel. It could be, if I really try to delve into this, and maybe I'll do a video about these kind of feelings, because it's super interesting from a psychological standpoint. But what it probably, if I really had to rationalize this, is there's probably slight things happening over time where there's, like, little warning signs of, say, the husband's voyage on the ship or whatever, that, like, oh, they were close to getting injured this time, and this time, and this time. And it's just, like, little things over time. And it's probably enough where subconsciously you kind of adding this all up, and then your brain's telling you after so many times, and then maybe when they're not around, you're like, man, I'm worried about them. And something happens to happen that night when your brain's telling you, hey, maybe you should be a little concerned about what's going on with so-and-so. And obviously, if this was really happening with through some sort of supernatural ways, you'd probably hear about this a lot more. I just think our brain is really good at picking up things subconsciously that are a danger to us and others that we care about that we're not necessarily consciously processing, but then we're getting the signals of, say, like, anxiety over somebody's well-being, because we do have more information than we realize. We're just not consciously, like, jotting it down, so to speak. So I feel like for a case like that, that's probably how you could explain it. Because I'm not personally a believer in anything supernatural or paranormal. I'm very grounded in my beliefs, but again, this is not me shooting out anybody's belief or anybody's religion or anybody's how you may think and feel about the world and explaining things around us, because at the end of the day, this is what makes these cases so interesting. If all of the explanations were, hey, it's probably just our brain picking up on things, or sick people seeing things that aren't actually there, what's the fun in that? There isn't. That's half the fun, I suppose, but not all of it. If everything was always just practical, these types of cases wouldn't be nearly as interesting to talk about. Because everybody has different worldviews, and everybody's going to process things in different ways, which makes cases like this, very interesting, because everybody has a different idea of what a doppelganger could be. And this is why I think going forth, I'm still going to do, like, phenomena in media, because it's fun to see what directors of, like, movies or shows or video games think of certain mythological ideas of different societies, because a lot of what you see, too, is, like, say we take, like, the video game example, and we're talking about, like, Devil May Cry. We got Japanese directors taking on German folklore and adapting it into their own ideas for their, like, fictional story. That stuff's super fascinating to see how other cultures will interpret different cultures' ideologies and mythologies and stuff. Because it's kind of, at that point, blending the two ideas together into something completely new. And I think that kind of goes back into why we're having, you know, the younger generation picking up on this kind of stuff and doing that whole, like, twin strangers thing. It's like, it all comes down to, there's certain ideas I feel like humans really like to explore. Something like, you know, a double, and it's getting reinterpreted in different ways and combining with a more modern lens. And if we think about it this way, it's not necessarily culture to culture, but it's time period to time period. Our younger generation is adapting this into something that makes modern technological sense. And even though it's adapting into something different, it's still an extension of the original idea of doppelgangers, which itself could get traced all the way back to ancient Egyptians. And when you sit and you think about that for a second, that's wild. That we're going all the way from ancient Egyptian spiritual ideas to now we have a modern kids talking about body doubles. It's really cool how far certain ideas, like, get processed through the ages of humanity and how they don't die out, like, ever. Pretty much what I'm getting at is I think we as humans, we're fascinated by very specific things sometimes, even if we're not consciously thinking about it. And especially when you have certain interests in these kind of mythologies, it carries on generation to generation in different ways and gets adapted to the times to be relevant once again. And you see this with other phenomena too, where there's, like, an older case of stuff that gets reinterpreted through a modern lens. And I wish I had examples off the top of my head, because I know I've read stuff like that before, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But I'm sure in whatever next video I do like this, I might have something like that come up. So that's gonna be about it for me. I feel like I wanted a lot more information in this video, but there's only so much you can really find about this yet again. So by no means do I think this is, like, the comprehensive guide of everything surrounding the mythology of doppelgangers. However, I think it's a pretty good video, information-wise, with enough notable sightings and relevant, you know, origin information, and then explanations and media interpretations. And obviously, at the end, I'd always like to tell you what I think of things. I feel like that adds personality to the video. It's that way, even say you watch somebody else's video on doppelgangers, sometimes, for me personally, I'm just talking through the lens of, like, what I like to listen to when I'm doing things. I'll watch different people's videos on the same topic, because if I understand that person's personality, I might want to see how they view the thing. And obviously, people are going to find different little, like, pieces of information that the other person didn't find or might not think is relevant. So then you kind of get more of a complete picture by, you know, reading or watching multiple people's interpretations of the same phenomena. So that's kind of why, like, I want to give my opinion on things and kind of tell you where I'm coming from after getting all the information that I have, because I'm not making my points before I research everything. Obviously, when I research stuff, I have an idea in my head what I think is going on, but I'm not trying to research with a bias. I'm just trying to write down what I'm reading in, like, short notes. That way I can talk about it, like, stream of consciousness sort of stuff. And then after I learn all this new information, then after I'm talking about all of it, while I'm talking about it, I'm kind of coming to my conclusion after I get all my information. So that's my thought process. That way you know where I'm coming from. And, you know, if you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed this video. These are a lot of fun to make. They are a lot of work. And, you know, if you enjoy this, I normally wasn't going to say this kind of stuff, but, if you get this far and you actually did enjoy what you hear, I do plan on doing more. You can subscribe to the channel, you can like the video or whatever. I think that stuff helps with the algorithm stuff, and, I don't necessarily care, and I don't want to, sell myself out whatsoever. If I'm going to make a video, I want it to get spread around because it's good, not because I'm trying to shill it out and spread it everywhere. I'm not going to do that. For all this could just die in the algorithm and get 5 views. I'd rather that happen than me to try to artificially shove this video in people's faces, because that to me, I don't want to get traction that way. I want people to watch this and listen to this because they actually enjoy the content that they're watching. So, if you did, I do plan on doing more stuff like this. This is going to be the only type of content. It's literally just whatever I want to do at the moment. But I think more of the spooky stuff is always something I'm interested in, always talking about the origin of different mythology things. I think I'm going to be doing that for quite some time to come. So if you enjoyed this and you think people that would also enjoy this, share it around and stuff. Personally, like me, I love these kind of videos. And I like when people show me stuff that I haven't, heard 1,000 times before, or maybe from a channel I haven't watched before, because then I could get, just relax and listen to something kind of spooky while I'm doing whatever, All right, that's enough rambling for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. That will be it. Later.